How to run Python. How to run Python. So the first concern with any computer language is how we're actually going to run the code that we're writing. We're going to rely pretty heavily on a bunch of things called online Python IDEs. And this is kind of a dumb acronym because it just means integrated development environment, and I imagine you don't really understand exactly what that means right off the bat, but basically it's just a place that we can write some amount of code and it'll run it for us, roughly speaking. The two that I would suggest off the bat are both websites. Obviously, you can put Python onto your computer, and it's not too complicated a thing to do, but to be honest, to start with, I would suggest using some sort of online thing, because then if you're not really loving Python as a language, you haven't gone to all the trouble to like download something, set it up, etc., etc. You've just gone to a couple websites. So this second website here is actually a good resource for all sorts of Python related stuff. You do have to scroll down a tiny bit to get to the IDE, and the trick is to click try it now. That will run a tiny chunk of code, and then from there you can write whatever code you want into the web page. So first off, before we get into any actual code, we have to cover a general guide to fixing any computer science problem. So same sort of deal. Fix any comp sci problem. Google. Yeah, Google is really your friend. Got to use Google. There's a ton of computer science information on Google. A lot of it is very, very high quality. This website, for example, is a great example. A lot of the times you're searching for examples of particular pieces of code. It'll send you straight to a little snippet on this website, which obviously has an IDE on it, so you can just run it right there and see how that code works and change it a little bit to get an idea for how it functions. These and many more resources are easily found through Google. The trick is just to include how does print work Python, to include a couple important things. This is a totally acceptable Google search. We have a function here, something in the language, the name of something important that we're trying to find in the language, and then we also have the name of the language. Right? So this is what we're looking for. And then this is the name of the language. Both those things combined help us out a lot, because if we don't have the name of the language, then you can generate this in a whole bunch of different computer science languages, and you run into problems really quickly. Okay, what is a float would be another good example. Again, if you're searching for what is a float, include the name of the language, and you can think of many more. One hot tip, I would say, is to include the word example as well. So as opposed to just having float and Python as being the key parts of our sentences, we also have the word example. So then example print Python would be ideal. Example float Python also ideal. Each of these are key Google search words, and they'll bring us something useful. All right, now let's get on to actually doing something in the language. Introduction to Python. Let's start about as simple as you can. X equals 1. This preserves 1 as X. In a lot of other languages, we'd actually have to jump through a couple hoops before we even start getting to do this sort of thing. This is the advantage of using something like Python. Originally, I was going to make my students jump through those extra hoops, but this is also much easier to write on the board, so I had to do something for my advantage to make the whole class experience run a little more smoothly. This is, for this particular little program, this kind of acts as the function. This is what's actually doing something. You could also, I suppose, consider the definition of x as the function as well, but when programs are this small, it can get a little hard to untangle exactly what's going on. So the actual output of the program, however, is very straightforward. We're going to dignify our output always like this, signify our output, always like this. X equals 1, print x, the output is going to be 1. Very simple. Or if you read this as an I, the output will be I. Case matters a lot. This, for example, is lowercase, right? And then this has to be the same case as was declared over here, right? So this has to be the same case as was declared over here. In general, the easiest way to learn the syntax for a computer science language, in my opinion, is just to run a bunch of programs and mess around with them, and then, you know, the different weird little things about how each language runs starts to fit in relatively smoothly. The big trick with Python is, of course, indenting, and I'm not even going to explain indenting most of the time we encounter it. I'm just going to let you try and run some code, and then, you know, you'll figure it out the hard way. That's better than trying to force you to memorize where to put blank chunks in your program, as far as I'm concerned. So, one last important thing is that programs have names. And preferably, you will build a library of programs with different useful functions that you can then draw on to assist you in your projects. This program is so simple you can commit it to memory very easily, and lots of our most basic programs we're going to want in our memory, but before they get to our memory, we need to make sure we actually have references of them. Your notes is a good place to start, but actually having them all on a computer is even nicer, because then you can just run them there. One quick little note about this, our .py extension here indicates that this is a Python file. You can make a Python file yourself on most computers just by taking a basic text file, changing the ending to a .py. X equals 1 over here as a detail is called an assignment statement. For us, and how this fits into our program so far, is we can kind of think as X as a set. X is a set with one member. And then what our print function does is it asks, I shouldn't use that symbol, forgive me. It asks the computer to tell us the contents of set X. And this is where hopefully we have an advantage coming to computer science through our mathematical approach. We've already worked with these objects mathematically, so now when we work with them in a computer science context, they make a lot more sense.